Go West, young men. This is the Paperback Warrior Podcast.
Woo doggy. Welcome to another episode of the Paperback Warrior Podcast. We should have went with different intro music this time.
It's the all rodeo show.
Yeah, this is great. So welcome to episode 31. This is February 17th, 2020. And we've got a really interesting episode today. It's our favorite Westerns. And there's a reason for this, Tom. What's the reason?
Okay, so there's this new podcast that has come out, inspired by Paperback Warrior. It's called Six Gun Justice. And it stars Paul Bishop and Richard Prosh, two authors who have this encyclopedic knowledge of the Western genre. Their podcast is going to be covering not only classic and contemporary Western fiction, but it's also going to cover Western TV shows, movies, and knowing Paul Bishop, old Western comic books. Now, you did some consulting with Paul Bishop before they launched this thing, right? You talked to him for a while?
Yeah, it was the first time I actually talked to Paul on the phone. It was a real pleasure speaking with him. He taught me more about podcasting than I really helped him. But yeah, we talked about podcasting, microphones, software, that kind of thing.
Good. All right, now Paul Bishop, here, have you seen this before? I'm handing a book to you right now. Tell the readers what I'm handing you.
I've got Diamondback number 6, Shroud of Vengeance. It looks like an adult Western.
Right, by
somebody named Pike Bishop.
So Paul Bishop's first novel was actually an entry in the Diamondback adult Western series written as Pike Bishop. But he's mostly known as a mystery and police procedural author. He's written and edited a lot of nonfiction work about the Western genre. And so this new podcast of his, Six Gun Justice, is going to be a natural outgrowth of his passion.
Dude, listen to this. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
No, lay it on me.
The first, on the opening page, special thanks and acknowledgement to Paul Bishop for his contributions to this work.
Well, that's good.
So the author's thinking
ripping the veil off this thing. Anyway, his partner on this podcast is a guy named Richard Prosh, who I kind of know. He's this hard-boiled mystery writer who has also several Western novels written as well. In fact, he was just elected president of the Western Fictioneers, a professional association of Western fiction writers. And I'm sure he's going to rule them with an iron fist. A few years ago, I had this really positive experience with Richard when we were both decided to read A Key to the Suite by John D. MacDonald at the same time. And then we had a long, detailed discussion of the book on Facebook, really analyzing the novel in incredible detail. It was like a ladies' book club, but for two middle-aged dudes. And I enjoyed the book and the discussion quite a bit. And I came to respect Richard Prosh as just sort of a great literary criticism mind, somebody who knows his way around discussing books. Anyway, so the Six Gun Western podcast is available on every podcast platform. You can search for Six Gun as one word. I think people might go wrong there if they put a space between six and gun. And you'll probably find it. I think it's going to start coming out every 2 weeks first, and then it's going to move to weekly as the show catches fire. They got a website to sixgunjustice.com and a Facebook group called, or Facebook page hyping the things with reviews also called Six Gun Justice. You should definitely check them out. Anyway, so what's next, Eric? What are we doing?
Well, in honor of our friends at Six Gun Justice, we thought it would be fun to take a little time here and review our favorite Western paperbacks and sort of just go back and forth, kind of like we did last week on the Fawcett Gold Medal Exchange.
Yeah, it sounds like a great idea. Why don't we start? I think it makes more sense, instead of just launching into reviews like we did last week, to describe our experience with the Western genre and why this genre actually appeals to us. Then we can discuss some of our favorites. You have a deeper history with this genre than I do, so why don't you go first? What is your personal history with these books, and why do you like them so much?
Yeah, so my introduction to Westerns in general was through my father. He's an avid Western enthusiast. He still is. Shows like Gunsmoke, Bonanza, High Chaparral, The Rifleman, and even Branded were always on the TV when I was growing up. My parents are retired, and they just watch that stuff all day. Dad loves Louis L'Amour and Zane Grey. That's his two favorite authors. He turned me on to Western paperbacks, I guess, when I was in middle school. And I can remember reading Louis L'Amour's The First Fast Draw, The Quick and the Dead, Hondo, and the early Sackett books, like high school, middle school. I started reading the modern Westerns. I can remember reading Thomas Edson's St. Agnes Stand on my first real job back in the day. And I think the movie Tombstone elevated my interest even more. So yeah, that's how I got into it. How about you?
All right, so let me hand you the stack of 5 books. You ever seen this series before? You tell them what I'm handing you.
All right, so I've got Wildcat's Revenge by Jeff Clinton, Wildcat's Rampage by Jeff Clinton, Wildcat Meets Miss Melody, same author, Watch Out for Wildcat, Wildcat's Claim to Fame. I've never seen these anywhere.
You ever heard of the series or the author?
No, and I don't even see them on the Facebook groups.
Okay, so these are the first Westerns I ever read. Well, I was 16 years old in 1986, and I picked up my first Wildcat O'Shea book by Jeff Clinton. They're these thin paperbacks in a series of 15 books that were published between 1961 and 1972 about this flamboyant and often very drunk old Western hellraiser named Wildcat O'Shea. The first book was called The Fighting Buckaroo, and the final installment was called Hang High O'Shea. Hilarious books, also filled with tons of action and Old West violence. Now, I didn't know it at the time, but Jeff Clinton was a pseudonym for an author named Jack Bingham, Bingham, who also wrote a lot of mysteries, including a popular series set in the world of tennis. Anyway, so I read the Wildcat O'Shea Westerns whenever I could find them throughout my high school and college years. Around that time, I also began to enjoy the hyper-violent Edge series written by Terry Harknett under the name George G. Gilman. I had no idea who the real author was. I just liked the extreme violence in these books when I was this young, testosterone-filled young man.
Understandable.
Yeah, and I only read a fraction of the 61 books in that series. But when I got older, I went to Dallas when I was living in Hawaii on a business trip, and I went to the Half Price Books flagship store, and I discovered the Gunsmith series, written by Robert Randisi under the pseudonym of J.R. Roberts. And I recall liking Randisi's Miles Jacoby Private Eye series about a boxer turned PI back in the 80s. I liked that quite a bit. So I tried my first adult Western. It was like mother's milk to me. I think I read nothing but adult Westerns for the entire year 2014, which led me to the Facebook groups in which Westerns were discussed, and eventually the Men's Adventure Facebook group, and meeting you, and now we got a podcast. So that's basically my backstory. So it's not as deep as yours as far as like touching all the right bases in the Western genre, but I like it. If I read 5 or 6 Westerns a year out of the 100 and something books, that's plenty for me. But I genuinely enjoy the genre because there's so much you can do with it. All it is really is just a setting, and then after that you can make they have horror Westerns. They got,
right.
You get a lot of them are mysteries. You have adventure ones. You have vendetta novels, and so it is a really cool setting. So why don't you talk about, let's discuss our 3 favorite Westerns of all time. So I think that would be a good way to do this.
Okay.
And since you wear chaps recreationally for lovemaking purposes, I'll let you go first.
My wife loves that. She really does.
She's a fan.
She calls me Crazy Man Compton. It makes me think of this Wildcat guy. So my first book is The Last Notch by Arnold Hanno. It was originally published in 1958 under the pseudonym Matthew Gant. Now, Starkhouse just reprinted this in 2017, and it has an intro by David Lawrence Wilson. The book stars a biracial aging gunfighter named Slattery. Slattery wants to retire. He basically just wants to stop killing. But he takes on one final contract worth a whopping $5,000. That's a lot of money back in the 1800s. The caveat is that the person Slattery is to kill will be named later. So Slattery accepts the contract, but later realizes he's accepted the job of killing the newly elected governor.
Ooh,
yeah. So at the same time, Slattery's heir apparent is this cold-blooded youth simply named the Kid, and he wants Slattery dead. He wants to take over the throne as the top-notch gunfighter. It's really this epic clash between old and new, and it's got really like this huge amount of psychological suspense to it. It's a really unusual Western because there aren't any real clear-cut good guys. This kind of sets it apart from being just this rudimentary Western story. We've seen, a fast gun versus the old dog, so to speak. We've seen that before. We've seen gunfighters taking on their last contract and so forth. But Arthur Hanno really does a lot of different things with this Western. It's just fantastic. Again, it's The Last Notch by Arnold Hanno, and definitely pick it up.
Little Arnold Hanno trivia. He was actually the editor-in-chief for Lion Books.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Yes, you look at David Goodis and Jim Thompson and all these great authors that got their start with Lion Books. I think Hanno was the guy who brought those guys to print.
Right, and oddly enough, Arnold Hanno wrote a number of baseball books. He was really known for his baseball love.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, good. Anyways, that was Eric's pick number 1. My pick number 1 is The Cowboy and the Cossack by Claire Huffaker. First things first, Claire Huffaker is a dude, if that matters. The book was published in 1972, and it's on nearly everyone's list of the best Westerns ever, and I think rightfully so. The concept's totally unique. 15 Montana cowboys sail in a boat to Siberia in the summer, and so it's not like going through the snow or anything like that. And they have a herd of cattle that they sail to Siberia, Russia, with, that they're trying to sell to the Russians. Actually, the Russians ordered it, and they're delivering it, basically. Anyway, so they need to travel over 1,000 miles of Siberian wilderness to deliver the cattle to their customers. The cowboys are joined by a group of Russian Cossacks, something that I knew nothing about, so I needed to Google basically what is a Cossack, because I'm an idiot. It's basically the Russia's equivalent of our own legendary cowboys. They're these great horsemen, they're these great warriors, and they have their own kind of storied history in Russia, kind of paralleling our cowboy history in the U.S. The two groups of Cossacks and cowboys bond together and fight together against each other and against other people on this amazing trip. It's incredibly exciting. It's this fish out of water, forced cultural exchange between these two cultures that really becomes a meditation on friendship, teamwork, leadership. It's this very moving book that I think actually transcends the Western genre. It has never, ever been released with a good cover. It has nothing but lousy covers in every generation of its release since 1972, so be ready for that. It's available on Kindle. I think it's also available as an audiobook, and it's also available now as a paperback reprint. The book is called The Cowboy and the Cossack by Claire Huffaker. And I think you just read a Claire Huffaker book, but not that one, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, I was going to add in, as part of my 7 Ways from Sundown by that same author, but I didn't because I knew you had already picked one of his books.
Right.
But 7 Ways from Sundown was fantastic. Look for my review on the blog pretty soon.
Yeah, I got a bunch of his other paperbacks sitting over there on the shelf. I got to revisit them because this book was so good, and sort of reflecting on it, because I read the book before I started writing reviews for Paperback Warriors. So I'm hoping that I can twist your arm to read that book and actually write a review of it, because I think it's going to be one of your favorites of all time.
Do you have it?
No, I have an ebook. I have it as an ebook.
Ah, okay. Yeah, I'd like to read it.
Yeah.
But I also heard that his Posse from Hell is really good too.
Yeah, is that the one that was made into a movie?
I think so. Maybe.
Okay, maybe. Yeah. So anyway, yeah, I got a bunch of them here, so feel free to rate them if you want to bring any home.
Yeah. Next is my second pick here, and it's from an author in a series that I like really, really a lot. It's Ralph Hayes and his Buffalo Hunter series. These books are really hard to find, so I'm probably not doing you any favors by recommending them to you, but Vengeance Is Mine is one of my favorite of the series, and definitely one of my favorite Westerns of all time. The series protagonist is a guy named O'Brien, and at the beginning of the book, he's out hunting buffalo. Naturally, he's the buffalo hunter. But oh, interesting. Siri is looking for a buffalo hunter as we speak. But he's out hunting buffalo, and these 3 gunmen show up at his campsite, and they start pointing guns at him. And O'Brien, he sort of just scampers out of the shooting. He kind of gets out of it, and he really just wants to be left alone. He just wants to shoot his buffalo and be done. But one of the gunmen accidentally shoots and kills the youngest of their trio, which is just this 12-year-old kid. So the 2 gunmen carry the 12-year-old back to town, and then they swear that O'Brien murdered the kid. So the novel's narrative is this sort of high-wire act of O'Brien, who's now a wanted man, attempting to outrun the bounty hunters and the fast draws that want to cash in on the reward money. It's a really violent, gritty, classic Western tale. I can't remember how many Buffalo Hunter novels there are, but Ralph Hayes, the last I checked, he's still alive and he's still writing Buffalo Hunter books. I think he might be up to like 15. But this one is really my favorite of the ones that I've read. Again, it's Vengeance Is Mine, and it was published in 1978 by Belmont. Hopefully you can get your hands on a copy. Good. Ralph Hayes, he was your pen pal for a while, right? You guys were writing letters back and forth? Yeah, and then I just sort of lost touch with him a couple of years ago. Yeah, you wrote a sort of an article about him, kind of a career retrospective article on Paperback Warrior, didn't you? Yeah, you can go out there on the desktop version, the right-hand side, and click on Ralph Hayes, and you'll see it. It's got a bibliography as well that I pieced together. And I think I've got just about everything he wrote on there. But it's a really good write-up. You should read it. Okay, good. Next one for me, my number 2 favorite Western of all times, is called The Journal of the Gun Years by Richard Matheson. It was originally published in 1991. Now, Richard Matheson, of course, is better known as a writer for horror and science fiction books. His works include I Am Legend, The Shrinking Man, Duel.
But he also wrote a handful of Westerns, and this one won the Spur Award for the Best Novel in 1991, and was also Stephen King's favorite book of 1991. It's about a gunfighter looking back on his life from his youth to when he discovered that he happened to be the fastest draw and the deadliest shot. This led to a career both as a criminal and a lawman, and eventually a legend of the Old West. It's one of those situations that gets parodied sometimes in that Western fiction touches upon, where young hotshots are constantly coming at this great fast gunfighter in order to kind of make a name for themselves and trying to get into a quick draw contest with him to bolster their own reputations. And what happens when someone with that kind of reputation gets older and his skills start to fade. It's an exciting book. There's a lot going on with it. It's sort of a fake biography of this guy. It's well written. It's a very reflective novel about being at the top of your game and then aging, which is something I guess we're all kind of dealing with at our age. It's just a great book that was worthy of the praise. It's also available on Kindle. It's available as an audiobook and a paperback. I don't have enough good things to say about this, and Richard Matheson's becoming one of my favorite writers just because everything I read by him in various genres is just some top-notch stuff. The book, again, is Journal of the Gun Years by Richard Matheson from 1991, another book that deserves a better cover than it got.
Right, and we did a podcast episode on Richard Matheson. Again, you can go out to the website and just click on his tag, and you'll see it.
I re-listened to that episode after we recorded it, and I remember kicking myself because I talked extensively about Richard Matheson's horror work, and then I talked about his noir fiction work that he did at the beginning. Yeah. I didn't mention at all, because I'm a moron, on that episode, the fact that he wrote Westerns at all, when in fact he had written it, and I had read one of my favorite Westerns of all times written by him. So I want to delve deeper into his Western books, and I have a book of Western short stories that he wrote over there on my Western shelf to your left.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so I may check that out as well.
Huh.
All right, so what's your number 3 favorite Western of all time, Eric?
This one is probably one that's on everyone's list. It's Louis L'Amour's Flint. The novel was published in 1960 and introduces readers to a guy named James T. Kettleman, who's not Flint, by the way. He's a successful stockbroker. He's from New York, and he's journeying by train to New Mexico to die of this illness. It doesn't say what it is, but I had a feeling that it was like cancer or tuberculosis, something like that. In flashback sequences, we learned that a man named Flint rescued Kettleman from a burning wagon at the age of 2. Flint raises the kid in sort of this father role. Flint is killed in more flashback sequences, and then we learn that Kettleman actually found the killers and avenged Flint's death. Now, again, this is all flashbacks. That isn't the actual premise of the book. The premise is that Kettleman is basically going to die, and that what he wants to do, Tom, is he wants to just go into a cave in New Mexico and just read paperbacks until he dies.
I sympathize.
Yeah, really. But he ends up coming to the aid of a female rancher, and she's doing battle with this greedy land baron. So it's sort of a classic Western tale. But in an odd twist, Kettleman starts calling himself Flint to create an aura of mystery with the enemies that he's fighting. Overall, I think a lot of Louis L'Amour fans cite this novel as his best, and he's got a bunch of good Westerns, but this one makes the list almost every time. I still have a lot of his work to get through. I've read a lot of it, but I can certainly see this one ranking really, really high, and I don't know if it can be beat as far as his novels go.
I know a lot of his books were made into movies. Was Flint ever adapted?
No, I don't think it was.
How odd.
Yeah, it's odd. And I think, I don't know, I have to look, but I think Flint and Hondo came out like maybe around the same time, and Hondo, of course, came out with John Wayne as the lead. But that was my last pick.
All right, good. So my third pick, I'm cheating a little bit with this one because it's also a highly respected book of literary fiction. It's an epic-length novel of about 900 pages, and it's called Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry, written in 1985. It's quite a bit different than the 180-page Bantam paperbacks or Fawcett Gold Medal paperbacks that we normally cover here. But these pretensions about it being a great book and a piece of literary fiction really shouldn't dissuade anyone from reading this book. It's a very fast-moving novel of the Old West with these vivid characters and lots of excitement. The reason it's so respected is because it's awesome. It's just a great book. It was made into a TV miniseries that a lot of people remember, starring Robert Duvall and Tommy Lee Jones. and young Ricky Schroeder when he finally got through puberty and became a young man. It was a great adaptation. In fact, I would say that the miniseries is almost as good as the book. Like Cowboy and the Cossack, the novel's about a cattle drive, but this one's led by two aging former Texas Rangers from the Texas border town of Lonesome Dove. One of the Rangers is a womanizer, and the other is the serious workaholic, kind of a grouchy guy. They decide that they want to drive a load of cattle from Texas to Montana with an eye towards settling down in Montana for the rest of their years on Earth. So they assemble this colorful crew of characters to join them on this massive cattle drive, and they have tons of adventures along the way. McMurtry's writing is excellent, and at times it's a genuinely deep and moving book, but there's not a single boring page in the book that I found. Lonesome Dove remains one of the best books I've ever read in any genre, and often people who never consider reading a genre novel fall in love with the book every time. It's one of my wife's favorite books, too, and she's not a person who normally would gravitate toward Westerns. Now, the downside, Larry McMurtry wrote some sequels that were just embarrassingly bad, just terrible cash grabs, and it's best to pretend those don't exist.
What's wrong with them?
Well, I don't want to spoil it, but some of the characters that you fall in love with from the first book aren't around to be in book number 2 and 3, and it's clear that he probably spent a lot of time writing Lonesome Dove, and the sequels he probably dashed off rather quickly to try to, put a deck on his house or something. I don't know, but they're just bad books and ought to be avoided at all costs. And I pretend they don't exist. So thank you for bringing up this painful memory to me. Anyway, it's just don't neglect this book because it was this massive bestseller. Everybody loves it, and the people love it for a good reason. And the book again is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry.
I think he was an avid book collector, and when I was out in Dallas, I was talking to the gentleman that was so nice to buy my books when I was out there, and he advised me that I think he had been down there where the author lived, and he has like an infinite number of buildings that are completely filled with books.
Wow, really?
Yeah, so he was an avid collector. But I do remember when that movie came out, it was a big deal. Like, that was all over the news, and it
doesn't feel like a TV movie. I mean, it feels like a studio production. Like, it feels more like the stuff they're doing now when you make like a 5 or 6 episode, like big budget Netflix or HBO style show. But this was just like a network TV miniseries, but they got some top rate actors. I mean, Robert Duvall's not a guy who makes TV movies, and
Bruce Boxleitner was pretty hot at that time.
Yeah,
not hot, but
not your type.
Yeah. Because I think he was Mr. King at the time, Scarecrow and Mrs. King.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what it was. He worked for the CIA. I want to ask you about a book that I just saw laying on the table.
Yeah, what do you got?
I just got this book. What is this series?
Okay, so the Frank Angel series by, was it Frederick Christensen?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I think there's like 6 or 7 or 8 books in the series, and it is an absolute mess. They're supposed to be very good. They're supposed to be very good to read, but it's come out twice. They've reprinted the series, and every time they reprint it, they retitle every single book, and I think they reshuffle the numbers.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah, so I pieced it together in a memo on my phone, exactly what the numbers are of each book and what book corresponds with what other book, the same book under the same title, so I don't buy the same book twice. I have to confess, I haven't actually read them. I believe the Find Angel series and are available on Kindle now as well as ebooks, and so, but that doesn't really help you sort out what order to read them in or anything like that. But people say great things about it. They're supposed to be terrific books, and I'm looking forward to trying them myself. You can borrow that if you want, but it's supposed to be a great series. It's the Angel series by what's the author's name again?
Frederick Christian.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't do us any favors because I got the exact same number that you got. I bought number 3 like 2 weeks ago.
Oh, there you go.
It's got a gorgeous cover. It's a Gil Cohen cover who did a lot of the execution novels. But what's interesting about it is this guy's a cowboy. He's got a 6-shooter on his side, but he's holding a bow and arrow and he's aiming at someone like almost like a Native American. It looks like they're in a swamp.
Yeah, having not read it, I can't tell you if Gil Cohen was basing that on a series or if it just came off the dome for him.
Hard to say.
Yeah,
it's wild.
How are we doing on time?
We got plenty of time. Yeah, you got 6-7 more minutes.
All right, you want to ask me what I'm reading now?
Hey Tom, just off the cuff here, what are you reading?
So I just started an interesting book. It's going back to our Fawcett Gold Medal episode from last week. It's called The Golden Frame by Joseph Chadwick. You ever heard of Joseph Chadwick?
I have one of his books.
Is it a Western?
I want to say it was maybe one of those pirate books where they're on a ship and...
Possible.
I don't know.
Joseph Chadwick was mostly a Western writer. He wrote a ton of Westerns for Fawcett Gold Medal, and this is, to my knowledge, the only crime novel that he ever wrote. The Fawcett Gold Medal, every now and then, we talked about this last week, has these covers that look like romance covers when it's actually like a blood-on-the-knuckles, hard-boiled novel. Now, Joseph Chadwick also, and I don't know why he didn't do it this way, he wrote 8 ace doubles as John Crichton, Creighton. His real name's Chadwick. He writes his crime novels as John Crichton. The Blonde Cried Murder, Destroying Angel, Evil is the Night, A Half Interest in Murder, Not So Evil as Eve, Strange Hold, Trial by Perjury, and The Wayward Blonde are his ace double titles. And his only book under his real name that's not a Western, or rather that is a crime novel, is this book, The Golden Frame by Joseph Chadwick. And I just started it. I'm only in like chapter 2 or 3, and so far it's excellent. It's about a guy, real tough guy, who comes back to Baltimore. It's a Baltimore book from Saudi Arabia, working in the oil fields. The book was written in like 1954, and he's broke. And he ends up kind of getting involved in a murder mystery involving a friend who got himself in some trouble. And I read a review on some other book blog that just said it was this fantastically violent action novel with a lot of like blood on the knuckles, hard-boiled stuff going on. But then it's got this cover that looks like a Harlequin romance.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I'm going to review it, obviously, for Paperback Warrior, so stay tuned.
Yeah, it's a horrific cover.
I'm sure it's probably a very good painting, and I'm sure Bob Dice down in Key West could tell us exactly who the painter was and how his work changed the world for men's adventure magazines and stuff like that. But the cover does nothing for me, and nor does it, I think, do anything for moving copies of this book.
Yeah. Going back to the Westerns, so... Talking about Westerns, there's so many like classic authors that I have yet to even touch. Like, for example, my dad swears by an older author called Luke Short. Have you ever read any of his stuff?
I've not. I have a bunch, but I have never read Luke Short. Same with Max Brand.
Yeah, I was going to say Max Brand. I've got like 6 or 7 of his books. I've never read one.
I think you could fill a warehouse with Max Brand. He was like a Lamore type who wrote like 1 million books.
I don't know if he was writing them, though, or someone who was just using him as a house name.
Really?
Kind of like what they did with Ralph Compton, I think.
You know who would know? The Six Gun Justice podcast guys. Those guys are walking encyclopedias of it. So we should probably let them pontificate on. They'll probably have a Max Brand and a Luke Short episode before it's all over.
Yeah, it could be. I would say of the classic Western authors that I've gotten into over the last year or so is Louis B. Patton.
Yeah, you've written some reviews of his books on Paperback Warrior that sound awesome. Like, you do a very good job of making his books sound like something that we should ought to pursue. And every time we post one of those reviews on Facebook, we get lots of feedback from people saying he's one of their favorite authors. He's kind of like an unsung hero of the genre. Like, everybody knows Lamore and Max Brand.
I think he would be a much more popular author if he had just a touch of humor just to take away the edginess, because his books are so violent and they're so straight-laced that there's not an ounce of humor anywhere.
It's just amazing that the Old West genre, that period of time in American history, took off so fully in pop culture. I mean, why not the Revolutionary War period? Right. Why not the Civil War period? Why, there's so many interesting periods where there's stories to be told in U.S. history, but that's the one that everybody latched on to.
Yeah, that's and when I was growing up, and this was late 70s. I mean, you wanted to be a cowboy. You just ran around with 6-shooter, and I still watched all the old Westerns were still on TV back then. Right,
exactly. I was kind of late to the game because it wasn't until the Wildcat O'Shea books in 1986 that I'm like, this would be such a cool era to be alive in.
Right.
Yeah, just when someone looks at you cross-eyed, next thing you know, you're gunning them down.
Yeah.
You get in trouble for that today.
Well, looking at those old TV shows, there's a lot of great authors that got tied into those old Western shows. I think didn't Harry Whittington do something with that?
Did he? If he did any Hollywood work, it would have been in the Western genre. Yeah.
Well, no, I'm saying like the spin-off books. Like, didn't he do Bonanza books?
Yeah, he did a Bonanza book, and he did that. Oh gosh, I hate myself for not knowing this because I was just looking at it today. There was Elvis starred in a Western.
Oh, Charo,
Chharro,
Yeah, that's right.
And he did that. And I guess he basically took the screenplay and used it as just a jumping off point for creating a fantastic novel. Paul Bishop reviewed it on his website, his personal blog, and made me want to read it. And so I have it sitting there on the shelf, and I'll have to revisit that sometime.
Yeah, I found in my collection, I didn't realize I had this, Tom, but apparently Day Keene wrote one Western novel.
Really?
And I found it in my collection. I was like, what is this? It couldn't possibly be the crime novel author, but he wrote one Western.
It's interesting that the authors of that era felt the need to create a pseudonym for themselves when they wrote like a romance or a gothic or a horror novel or something else because they didn't want to water down their brand. But when they wrote a Western novel, even if they were already a mystery writer, for the most part they just did it in their own name.
Yeah.
Like Harry Whittington's not it's not going to water down my brand to be Harry Whittington, the Western author, even though everyone thinks I'm the crime fiction author.
Yeah. I'll put you on the spot for one more question here. Yeah. What is your favorite adult Western novel?
There's a series of novels that were long-arm doubles. That basically James Reasoner wrote them all. And I wrote an article for Paperback Warrior called The Adult Western Super Friends, where I discussed this 3 or 4 book series of long arm giants. These are the 300-page long arms, not the 180-page, where what James Reasoner did was he basically took every single adult Western hero that he had access to, the rights to, and wove them into one giant story together. So it had oh gosh, I'm drawing blanks right now. And like a lot of the long arm giants, it had the duo from the Lone Star books, a woman named Jessie Starbuck and her kung fu sidekick Key.
Right. Yeah.
It had the
Sky Fargo.
No, he wasn't in that, but he was on a different publisher, and so he could only draw from those. Anyway, go ahead and read that article. It's called The Adult Western Super Friends. It's on Paperback Warrior. It basically reviews and tells you how to get into this weird 4-book series where James Reasoner basically becomes Stan Lee trying to create this Marvel universe of adult Western heroes. There's also a Gunsmith. It might have been Gunsmith 300 that has both Long Arm and Slocum in it.
Oh, okay.
All 3 guys get laid, but not with each other.
Okay, good. That would put a whole different look on that series. Well, that's it. That's all we got.
All right, man. Well, this is our Western episode, and check out our friends at Six Gun Justice podcast, and let them know what you think about their show. And we're going to get back to our normal crime fiction and action adventure fiction stuff next week.
Remember to visit us at paperbackwarrior.com. Visit us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and be so kind to leave reviews and ratings for us on all your favorite streaming services. And spread the word. We appreciate the support. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye now.